Looking at this picture, you can see a really good description of the Sea of Galilee. We're going to start at the bottom right of the picture where Jesus calms the sea. This event is found in the book of Matthew, chapter 8, verses 23 through 27, and the book of Luke, chapter 8, verses 22 through 24. But we're going to use Mark's account, which is found in the book of Mark, chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. Let's read it together. On the same day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us cross over to the other side." Now when they had left the multitude, they took him along in the boat as he was, and other little boats were also with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that it was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on a pillow. And they awoke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Then he arose and rebuked the wind, and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. But he said to them, "Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith?" And they feared exceedingly, and said to one another, "Who can this be, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" Matthew's account says that Jesus was in Capernaum. He, that is Jesus, got in a boat to teach the people there on the shore of Galilee throughout the day. We see in verse 35 that when Jesus had finished preaching that evening, he told his disciples it was time to cross over to the other side of the sea. In 1986, the hull of a fishing boat was excavated from the shore of the Sea of Galilee. The carbon dating shows that it was from Jesus' time. The boat was 26.5 feet long, 7.5 feet wide, and 4.5 feet high, and would have held approximately 15 people. This would have been a typical fishing boat at that time. This boat is very much like the one that Jesus and the disciples crossed the Sea of Galilee in. Verse 36 says that when they set sail, that is, when they left the multitude, they took Jesus along in the boat just as he was. Since his disciples did not know that the storm was going to rise, this could possibly mean that Jesus went with them dressed as he was, which was not for a rainstorm. It could also possibly mean that he was very tired after preaching all day there by the shore. We also see in verse 36 that there were others who followed Jesus and his disciples in smaller boats. They were possibly wanting to follow Jesus and hear more from him when they reached the other side of the sea. We see in verse 37 that a great windstorm arises and begins pounding the boat. The boat begins taking on water. Looking at the map, you can see that there were mountains that sat on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. Back then, and even now, very cold air comes down across the mountain and hits the warm temperature coming off the sea, and a very violent storm takes place. This is what's taking place now. Verse 38 tells us that Jesus was asleep in the stern. This was not a double-decker boat. The stern would have been a small area that set down a little ways where someone could curl up and try to sleep. This is the only place in the scriptures that refers to Jesus being asleep. He could have been asleep for two reasons. One, Jesus would have been very tired, and since he took on the form of a man, he would have needed sleep just as we do to gain his strength back. Two, being divine also, he knew this storm was going to rise, so he might have been testing his disciples' faith. If so, they failed the test because they wake him up and ask him why he didn't care that they were all going to die. Matthew's version says they woke him up and said, "Lord, save us, we are perishing." That is, we're going to die. Luke's version says they woke him up and said, "Master, Master, we are perishing." That is, we are dying. There were at least 4 fishermen in the boat: Peter, Andrew, James, and John, and they had seen bad storms before, but this one had them believing that they were all going to die. We see in verse 39 that Jesus speaks directly to the wind and the sea and tells them to stop. The wind and the sea obey him. It says here in verse 39 that a great calm replaced the great windstorm that we read about in verse 37. In verse 40, we see that Jesus rebukes his disciples for their lack of faith. They'd already seen some of the miracles that Jesus did, but they seemed to have not realized just who he was yet. You would think since Jesus calmed the sea and the storm that they had no longer been afraid. But verse 31 tells us after he commanded the wind and the sea to cease, that they were now exceedingly afraid. It seems as though they now realize they are in the presence of the Creator of the heavens and the earth. We can learn from this event that as life rages around us, there is someone who can and will provide peace for us if we'll have faith and allow Him to do so. Just click on the video that says The Ministry of Jesus on and Around the Sea of Galilee, Part 2 to continue.